James, welcome to the podcast.
Great to be here, Jake.
Awesome. Today I'm going to begin by framing this conversation with the power of podcasting. And we met very briefly at a Bitcoin conference in person. And consequently, you came across some of my content. In particular, I was talking about real estate versus Bitcoin. And that's what we're going to spend a large chunk of today talking about. But you reached out to me on like a YouTube comment or something. And I said, by all means, send me an email. And I sent hi@jakewoodhouse.io. I have a public email people contact. And here we are having a conversation. There's been some back and forth voice notes going on. And it's really freaking awesome, the power of content to connect with people in ways that you just can't envisage. Like I'd have no idea who's actually looking at this stuff, and I have no idea who's going to react to it. And it's given with no expectation. But what's fun is the quality of what comes back. And in this instance, you will be the first guest on the Jake Woodhouse podcast who has essentially been an audience member first, but has reached out to me with something. And I'm like, God, this would make a great podcast. And yeah, long story short, thank you so much, James, and really appreciate supporting the work I've been doing with your attention and actually following along. So awesome vibe to kick things off. Now, my first question is to basically dive into what we were discussing. And so I posted some stuff about selling real estate to own more Bitcoin and the discussion around you can't live in a Bitcoin. And you came and you shared with me a situation that you were in. And you're basically tossing up like, do I want to own real estate or do I want to own Bitcoin? And so let's start there. If you would be able to walk us through the situation that you're in and the decision-making you're trying to make.
Love it, Jake. I appreciate, all of that. I think from that weekend when we briefly connected, I saw that you did some MC work at the event. And I was particularly drawn to the quality of your questions and the kind of your curious nature. So we chatted briefly. I knew that you were located in New South Wales, and I lived in Sydney for over 10 years and frequented it often for work. And so this whole idea of real estate, and I knew that you had some exposure to, all of what's going on here in Australia. So when I started listening to your podcasts and, just following the trajectory that, you were launching on YouTube, and I really just engaged with a lot of the content, a lot of the guests that you had. And I think, there would have been a question in regards to the property market. And that's something that, I've been in and around for most of kind of my working life. So in context to investing in it, selling, moving around it, it's always been something that for me, I've had a particular awareness of. I think when it comes to Bitcoin, there's a whole lot of ideas that have been evolving in me over this last, probably 5 years since I've really started my own due diligence on the asset class, I guess. So there's so many ways we can sort of look into that.
Well, let's go here, James. So help me understand why you've been in and around the real estate market. So like, what did you do professionally in your career that either gave you exposure to it, or perhaps it's something from like a family business perspective? I don't know. So what drew you to the real estate market, and like what experience do you have with it?
Going right back to when I stepped into the workforce, I did a fine furniture apprenticeship. I bought my first block of land when I was 18. And so I've basically sort of been buying and selling homes to live in basically my whole career. I work in interior design, furniture design. So creating space has always been something that I've been really interested in and practicing as a profession. I guess as part of that learning process of, like I said, always been either buying a place, renovating it, selling it, and just refining over the years what it is that I like, what it is that I want, and at this stage have got a decent body of work of observing the Australian property ups and downs in terms of the market. And my experience has been it's not always been like it has, I guess, these last 10 years. And so I've been just actively participating in, but also observing and kind of critiquing along the way, and just asking more and more questions. Why does this sector behave like it does? And so there's always been, a deep sort of questioning within me, even though I've been sort of playing in it myself, I guess. So yeah, it's always been in my field.
And when you ask that question, why does real estate behave how it does? What were some of the conclusions you came to initially, and how have those shifted over time?
Yeah, it's a good question. What I've observed is I've considered myself somebody that, for a long time has been in the sector. So learning, participating, buying and selling. And I have a particular skill set that can take a place, I can renovate it, I can create a vision for it, and I can kind of make something out of nothing, if you get my drift. So
add value.
I've put that add value.
Would be one way of looking at it.
Add value. So I've seen that opportunity, and I've appreciated that I can do it. But what I've seen is, depending on the market forces at play and depending on the timing of things, it can either go incredibly well, or it can go not so well, or it can go, even to the downside. So over the years, as I've moved in and done a similar kind of patterning in terms of like adding value, creating something that wasn't there, it all depends on the market about whether I make a profit, whether I get my money back, or whether I lose money, whether I, have invested my time for nothing. And so that time preference is another really interesting point. But yeah, the questions around the property market come from my observation that even with my skill set, I can't always get it right. But as a collective in Australia, it seems to me that everybody thinks they're a genius when it comes to property. And so it's always been, I'm like, just so curious about really what's driving the psychology of people, and why do we in Australia seem to think that it's a sure bet that if I buy something, I'm going to sell it and make some money. And that to me has become more and more an illusion that I kind of really am quite, I guess, critical of in my own perception. Yeah.
I mean, a confession from my perspective with real estate is I'm not a very good real estate investor. And in my experience, I lost money on 2 deals and made money on 1 deal, and net negative across all 3. Yeah. And the biggest loss I ever took was on a London apartment where I actually took a 2-bed, 1-bath apartment and renovated it and made it into a 2-bed, 2-bath apartment, which I thought would add value. 8 years I held the position and I exited, and I only managed to get 50% of my equity back out.
Yeah.
It was miserable. And I was stuck in this hard place where it's like, this is actually way back now, 2021, 2022, when I finally managed to find a buyer. But it took me about 1.5 years to actually sell. And the main reason for that was a psychological one. I kept sacking agents because they'd give me a price and I'm like, sweet, sell it. And they just wouldn't get any interest. Yeah. And I'm like, well, it must be the agent's fault. And I didn't confess to myself that actually I had overvalued real estate on my books. Yeah. And I just wasn't ready to face the market.
Yeah, I like that.
And eventually I did, because of our friend Bitcoin. There's an opportunity cost. You're like, okay, well, I'm actually 50% down. Fuck. It's your own money. Like, whoa, I'm a private investor. I'm not managing someone else's. I can't just leave it and run away and go, oh, I'm sorry, I've lost my job. It's like, no, there's your capital's gone. Yeah. Which in one way is like, I really love investing because you get paid for your decision making. But the problem is you're making a decision with information that other people might not have or you don't have. And in this case, what you've brought up is a brilliant discussion. It's like, why does the market do that when you actually added value to something? That doesn't make sense. And ironically, the one deal where I did make money, and it was about 10 or 20% uptick in price, which was largely cancelled out by the friction cost of buying and selling. Again, people don't factor that in, right? But I did nothing to the property. I just lived in it. And yet the price went up. But there was scuffs on the walls. There was some water damage that we'd ignored. We did add a little bit to the garden, but very much like surface level stuff. And you're like, what the hell is going on here? So take us through then the evolution. You are someone with a skill set. You've got an eye for a space. You can really make something look better and be better. So add value, but yet the price goes down. What were the conclusions that you started drawing?
It's sort of multifaceted, as it always is. So
yeah, please take us through it. We've got time. No problem.
Early on, I originally started and I bought a piece of land. This land was about 1.25 acres. And part of the opportunity was I had a skill set and I thought I could build a place. So this was probably, this would be 20 years ago or more. And so the land was affordable. I could buy that. And then I thought I could build a place on it. And so I started to do that. Now, the momentum in the market was really, really interesting, where a lot of people were subdividing part of that block, and I had a certain size, and I ended up being able to create a little access road, and I created a strata title kind of style setup, which unlocked more sort of plots on this original piece of land. So I kind of very early on rode the momentum and saw the tremendous upside that was created through basically the market forces, nothing really genius in what I was doing. So that was kind of my first kind of stepping into it. And I thought I was really quite excellent at this. And I
mean, to some extent you were. You took risk and you got a result.
Exactly. So I think that was an interesting kind of start. And fast forward, I got involved in some other sort of ideas and was really sort of thrown into the world and trying to learn too fast. And I didn't really have the guidance that I needed to really understand what I was doing. So I kind of fumbled my way through that. And in the end, sold the subdivision, not quite finished, and sold the home probably for a break-even point, because what I'd effectively done is I'd sort of gone out and seen equity as a bit of a tool to live my own life a little bit, and so I'd kind of squandered, really a lot of the good work that I'd kind of done in that season, and so then I sort of
it's a good lesson.
Evolved. It was a good lesson, and the next years it was more back to I would buy a property. I had a partner, we had a business. And so we would buy a place and we'd do a beautiful reno. And then we really enjoyed the creative process of doing that. And then sort of moving it on when we got our next best idea. Now, what I noticed in that process was the emotional side of buying a place that we liked and that we could still see potential and add value to, but that part didn't really lead to profits per se. So for a period of probably 5 or 6 years, we probably did 3 builds, really, really beautiful, high quality, well executed, and I put in the time to manage those properties, do a lot of the work myself. But we had a business that was doing really, really well on the side. But the truth is, when I go through and work out the numbers on those properties, I would have got little or no money for my time. We would have got potentially our capital that we put in back. Potentially, once we've got those closing costs, the stamp duty on entry. These equations, if I really want to look at the fine detail, they don't look so good. And so there was a couple of times we bought an investment property just because we had disposable income. We thought that's what you do. And at the time we explored that, didn't really work. we didn't really hold it long enough. But the pattern that I saw was the emotional element to buying the property first. I think that's potentially a bit of a curveball, because the emotional part of it sets us up for probably expectation. And expectation, I think, with property is a really important thing to really get control of, because it's our expectation of the outcome that sometimes we're so fixated on, and we often will push ourselves harder into a bad situation for the sake of that. So there was that period of time, I would say, was a real learning phase. And I wouldn't say property did anything for me financially, but I had a business at the time with my ex, and that was sort of carrying and giving us optionality to choose our own adventure, so to speak. Fast forward, I'd moved to Sydney and started to dabble in things there. Now, the timing of things with my purchases in Sydney, I bought a commercial property in a really up-and-coming suburb circa 2013. I then sold that in 2017, and then moved into a plot of land that I felt had development potential. And I held that from 2018 to 2022. And, the whole thing around COVID came. I tried to sell it, didn't sell. I thought, oh no, property's going to go through the floor. I ended up unlocking the development approval in those next 2 years. And that, with the property market momentum, was an incredible opportunity that really paid off. So I guess what I would say is the emotion around property is something that I've seen can bring me unstuck a little bit. Mm-hmm. There is opportunity there. And what I've realized is, I thought the property market was in a bubble in 2017, just as I do think it is now. And so what I've realized is, despite my preferences to what I think is happening in the market doesn't actually care. So it's been so interesting, because I've then moved into another property, which is currently what I'm sort of winding up now. And that's another sort of layer on all of this. But ultimately, those are the nuances. The market forces is everything, and everybody thinks they're a genius when they're up. But again, you can have all the skills, and I would consider myself one of those with a lot of skills in the sector, and you still might not get a positive result.
And that must be very hard to actually stomach. Just like, what? All that work and expertise, that means nothing.
Yeah.
And so let's go to the decision-making process that you're going through right now. And thank you for taking us through that journey, because there's nothing better than personal experience in life, in my opinion, and being able to learn from people like yourself who've actually been and done this stuff is incredibly valuable. So the property that you own today, with all of that experience behind you and the skill set still in existence, what are the pros and cons, i.e. why you bought it, what it does for you, and actually what you're thinking of doing as a next step?
Yeah, so the property that I've owned for the last 3 years, Jake, and over the years, everything, I really believe in this process of refinement. So, having homes, selling homes, for me, the romance of it is no longer there. And so it's over the years has become, how do I want to live? What are the things that...
Great question.
What is it about this idea of home, this idea of space? What does it mean to live sustainably or rhythmically, connected? All of these things, because what I've experienced is a lot of patterning and disconnection from that, and flipping homes has been, in a lot of ways, whether I'm making money or whether I'm not making money, it's been quite it's been a process that I wouldn't say has deeply fulfilled me. So I think the questions have always been kind of like refinement, why, this, that. And so over the years, the last 10 years, I would say, I've been really thinking hard about what it is that I need, because I've had a lot and I've also gone through times where I haven't had a lot. And so what I've realized is what end of the spectrum doesn't necessarily equate to fulfillment and purpose and all these sort of deeper interesting subjects. So for me, what I chose to do is I decided I wanted to buy some land, and I wanted to connect deeper with the process of like creating value for the simple needs that I have: shelter, for food, these kind of core concepts of what it means to be human. So this was really driving my decision to purchase my latest property 3 years ago, which is a 50-acre parcel of land in my home state of South Australia, the Adelaide Hills. And I was looking with, particular ideas around, water security, access to a larger city, and looking for something that I could curate all of the different ideas around sustainability, around collaboration, around creativity. And so my idea was to really holistically try to curate something from the ground up. And so land was kind of what I thought, or what I think is a great way to facilitate that dream. So this property is set up with all of those elements. And for the last 3 years, I've been really grafting here to grow the ideas, grow the collaborations, and for the most part, it's been quite a success. But it's also a lot of work, and 50 acres is a lot of land. And so my current iteration is I have had this place for 3 years, and now I've decided to move that on, based on a lot of different, I guess, ideas and a lot of different things that I've been wrestling with about my future, what it looks like, opportunity, optionality, I guess. A lot of questions I still have around that. So that's kind of the current state of basically.
James, if I may just jump in. So there's an amazing process going on in and around Bitcoin. And there's a great phrase, which is that Bitcoin doesn't change, but you change. And I think that's, for myself, speaking for myself, absolutely true. But there is this kind of like idyllic concept that floats around of like, okay, actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to retreat to my HQ. I'm going to have land. Yeah. I'm going to have my own water. Yeah. I'm going to have my own cattle. I'm going to have 15 children, and you can all go fuck yourselves.
Yeah.
And it's an awesome dream.
Mm-hmm.
And the property you've described is very close to that. So you have, in a sense, attained something that many people dream of. But the reality is, I'm actually going to sell. So could you explain a bit more about why you've got to that conclusion?
Yeah, the answer to that question is probably where it drops into, like, philosophy and purpose and all these deeper, meaningful processes. So after I've been establishing and working and grafting these 3 years to build up the different projects and really start to see some momentum with that, what I've also been realizing and I'm kind of wrestling with is looking at why I made this decision and what actually was behind, the reason why I find myself with these set of circumstances. And as I've sort of worked that sort of backwards, I've realized that COVID was a big kind of stimulus for me to fast forward my dreams and my ideas of maybe creating some protection, buying that land and giving myself some optionality for choice, because I could see that choices were getting sort of taken, and that my options, the way that I saw it, were different because of these external factors coming in and dictating. And so I look back and I can see there was a little bit of like, not necessarily fear, but in some ways, like really wanting to make the move now to create a life that gives me a little bit more protection from what could happen. So I would say that my ethics are still quite aligned with the reasoning for landing here. But as I've been here for 3 years and worked through the reality of what it means to manage this much land and also explore all the other creative things that I want to do in life, it was getting harder and harder. Now, 5 years ago, I also started my learning about Bitcoin, and that's probably, the major catalyst to me rebuilding how I can conceptualize life, how I can see a future, what I am now becoming more and more passionate about. Bitcoin is been something that has been slowly growing and slowly becoming more and more part of my my consciousness, my passion. And Bitcoin is one thing that I think is shaping more of my decisions than I realize, based on a lot of really interesting key points, which I think is probably worth trying to dig into somehow. So this property aligns perfectly with what I want, but the size and the time preference in where my life's at and what I want to build and what options I really have, that's a really interesting question. Because when you have a mortgage and when you have a finite life, then I start to look at all of the different options. And the reason I've decided to sell was because I've chosen to align myself with a different pillar, let's call it, a different idea to base my future decisions on, which isn't necessarily a piece of land. It's more an understanding that the world's changing. There's an asset class that I believe captures more than just economics, more than just sound money. It captures, opportunity and all these sorts of, ideas. So I'm not sure if I'm rounding out the question, Jake, but
what intrigues me is the decision making. And I mean, my opinion, just to kind of jump on the back of where you were going with that, is, first of all, Bitcoin shines a light on real estate's like actual utility. And the fact that it's been heavily financialized and is used as a form of money. And it's used as a form of money because the currency that we're told to use, the dollar, the euro, the yen, the RMB, they don't store value. And so when you're able to start studying this thing, Bitcoin, and you come across Austrian economics and you come across the phrase sound money, like, oh, hang on, what do you mean there's a money that stores value? That's not money, mate. It's like, well, actually, look at the different characteristics of money: divisibility, durability, etc. And then look at the actual features of money: unit of account, store of value, medium of exchange. The Austrian school has been very, very clear on what it believes sound money to be for a long time. It's suddenly this whole new lens on the world. It's like, well, hang on, sorry. So you mean I could just buy this stuff and it sits in self-custody? There's no OPEX. There's no management time required. It gains in purchasing power over time. I can send it whenever I want. I can receive whenever I want. And it's a savings technology. So in some ways, it's not even an investment. It's not, you're not taking as much risk. It's like this, well, to use cheat codes kind of framing, it's a cheat code on life. And so when that option appears, which I still believe hasn't happened to the vast majority of people. They haven't drawn the dots together in this significant a way. It's like, hang on. So if I sell my land and I put it all in Bitcoin, the capital growth is faster. There's no management time required. And actually, I get my time back.
Mm.
It's a very different discussion, right? And what it really means is you value your time differently. To tee up the next phase of this, then, as you're able to, let's say, shed a skin to evolve, what might you like to do with your time? Like, you still have a skill set in that area. Do you think you will continue to use that in some way, or are you going in a completely different direction?
Good question. Just to sum up, when I bought this land, I was also going down my Bitcoin, phase, circa 2020. I think I arrived here 2022, so I'd already bought some Bitcoin and I was passionate about it. Fast forward 3 years, my strategy was always I buy the land that I want. I had a certain amount of capital and I had to take a mortgage to purchase this. I didn't want to, but I did, based on the thesis that I thought Bitcoin would appreciate and I'd use the Bitcoin appreciation to pay off the farm, right? That was my thesis. 3 years later, I've changed. I'm a lot further down in my research. And now I'm the man that goes, I don't actually want to sell my Bitcoin to buy the farm. That's where I'm at.
Wow. And so why wouldn't you actually leverage up more? So let's say a simple example, you've got $1 million property and you have a 50% mortgage on that property. The price of that land or house may have gone up in the last 3 years. So say it's now worth 1.5. This is a pure example. You've only got a 500 grand mortgage on it. Rather than sell the whole thing and put the $1 million into Bitcoin, you could actually remortgage potentially and get a 80% mortgage on a property, get out your 500, 600, 700 grand and buy Bitcoin with that and use Bitcoin to pay the interest.
Yeah. That is a strategy I actually don't mind. It's not personally something that I would choose to do based on the fact that I'm single, I have no children. I don't necessarily have these more really defining elements that would locate someone somewhere and actually really drive home this kind of, this thesis of this is where we're landing, this is what we're going to do. I could see a world where that would be a fine strategy, but for me, I probably am more risk adverse to the greater property marketplace. So for me, my lens is a mortgage is an equation to some amount of weight and responsibility. So when I live with a mortgage or when I don't live with a mortgage, I'm somebody that's willing to say there's a visceral difference in my life. When I live with a mortgage, there's a burden of responsibility that comes with that. It's a
commitment to others.
It is. Yeah. It is. And it's not nothing. And I think so many people just gloss over the fact, I have a mortgage, I don't have a mortgage. It's something that you have to wake up every day and figure out how you're going to meet. And so I have come to be a person that respects the fact that when I have debt, that the cost of that, the cost of carrying that, the cost of waking up every day, there's something to that, right? And so I've often wondered for my friends with kids and, my siblings and there's a different motivation sometimes to sort of like pave a way. And I've often wondered, would my decisions change if I had children or those sorts of things driving those decisions? But I don't. And therefore my time preference and all of those questions, I think I weigh up very differently. And my choice to not say reverse mortgage or pull out equity to buy Bitcoin is because ultimately I believe that the debt game is going to not pay off sometime. And so for me, when I cast out 5, 10, 15 years, I'm not comfortable to be positioned heavily with a mortgage that I'm speculating with, so to speak. So if I don't have the income or I don't have those if I don't have the business to really sort of see light at the end of the tunnel of paying that mortgage out, I kind of feel like that's a gamble I'm not willing to take, especially because I also have equity in real time available to me now that I can realize by selling the property rather than loaning. And I can put that equity to work, potentially by buying Bitcoin, potentially by doing other things. But I guess my choice is to be more conservative, because I think the opportunity to invest in something like Bitcoin for me is almost, it is a bit, for me, it's become more of a consciousness revolution than it is about like you said, an investment. But I do believe that the protecting of my capital in Bitcoin far outweighs the risk of owning property.
Yeah, and I'm completely in agreement with you there. I also love the simple fact, like, it's horses for courses. Every independent actor is willing to make the choice that's available to them, and it's their decision. And
That's right.
Everyone has a different set of factors involved, and that's one of the reasons why the fact that, like, value is subjective, right? That simple truth. Like, every single person thinks about things differently, and that's okay. And it's just fascinating to me listening to how you think these things through. I guess it's quite fun to work this through where I'm sat, which is with 3 kids under the age of 5. And my wife and I spend an inordinate amount of time, and what's now been 3 years since we've not owned any real estate, thinking about where we're going to live and dealing with landlords and figuring out leases. And it's been very stressful, to say the least.
Yeah.
And as of right now, I've got a removals truck coming next week that's packing the house up, and we don't know where we're going to live. So it's like, it's come right down to the wire. We haven't found another 12-month lease unfurnished. So we'll go into some kind of Airbnb short term whilst we wait to find the right thing. So I'm becoming a more and more motivated buyer of real estate.
Yeah.
But as an investor, I'm very conscious of, I don't want to be the desperate guy buying the house that I don't actually want. And I also don't want to go and compromise. I don't want to buy it in a location that I actually don't want to be in. And I don't want to buy of a quality that I don't actually want. And what I'd love to do is build. But if you build, it's going to take 2 years, probably 3 or 4. So that's like another 3 years. It's like, we might not even want to live in this part of the world in 3 years' time. Who knows? So there's a lot of things that I'm trying to figure out. But just generally speaking, I would take Bitcoin and self-custody over a leveraged piece of real estate with like a 25% equity position. Every day of the week, I would go Bitcoin. And that's for the capital upside, and that's also for the counterparty risk. So where I'd like to go next, James, is you touched on this very briefly when we were doing some audio notes, but as an Australian, you've become a bit frustrated with Australia, I think it would be fair to say. You didn't give me all the details, but I'd love to understand a bit more about why that's the case.
Yeah, a can of worms on that one. But Australia, for me, really has for so long represented some form of a lucky country. Now, I would sometimes, go into an esoteric kind of like conversation around, why that isn't the case. But for the best part, let's look at it from a place to bring up a family, to have a job that's secure, and to have a life that's generally day to day pretty consistent. And I think Australia has really been a great place for a lot of those, those factors, I would say. But what I can observe is, looking at my parents' generation, looking to my own, and having had 20 years in the workforce and a long enough period to observe what has or maybe hasn't changed, or what is maybe changing not for the better. My conclusion has really come down to Australia being a place that for me is becoming too laid back about things that I think will ultimately change the way that Australians have to do life. I've become more and more critical as I've seen the major economic play, which is property, turn into something that's just more to me like an Australian religion than it is anything to do with sound economics, to do with like, you know, an altruistic way of life for a family. I mean, for me, it's gone way beyond that. And because I've asked my own questions around it for so long, much before property was the trending element that it is now, for me, I think Australia is asleep at the wheel on so many layers, and especially economically. I subscribe to, I guess, an Australia that may have to go through a period of instability to really probably catch up to where I think many other places in the world have to deal with day to day. And my critique with Australia is that we're too willing to talk about something we think we know the answers for, and the majority of people have just been lulled into this hyper reality around either getting on the property market or stacking properties to what is already, you know, a portfolio, so to speak. And so I don't know how deep to go down the rabbit hole in terms of politically, but
whatever comes to mind, totally fine. Open conversation. If we get cancelled, we get cancelled. That so be it.
No, well, look, I mean, I think what I saw in and around COVID for me was a chance for me to step back and really observe the collective psyche. I'd travelled overseas the entire year of 2019 and basically spent a year almost like on a sabbatical, on a journey with myself to just reclaim, you know, some time and some perspective and some inner experiences, I guess. And coming back, and a few months, you know, after that, living in Sydney and watching the hysteria that sort of took over, you know, the country that I've lived in most of my life, for me, just has left me with more questions than answers. But these observations that have come through loudly is that Australia is a place that is really desiring government to create solutions for them. Australians, on the whole, really don't want to talk about the hard truths and take firm responsibility for their lives. And that's my critique on Australia, and my generalized critique on the trajectory in which I see it going. And I'm in this phase of like winding up the different things, different enterprises here in Australia, so that I can explore other regions and explore places that may present more opportunity than just the, you know, work, buy property, you know, narrative here.
It's very interesting, James. Thank you for sharing. I arrived in Australia 31st December 2019 and moved into central Melbourne and spent 4 years there. So was at the coalface, so to speak, of the complete carnage that, you know, COVID zero policies and shit like this created in inner city Melbourne, and how it became a police state. It became a medical apartheid. It was absolutely mental what was done in the name of health. And
it was.
Ironically, recently I became an Australian citizen. And
congrats.
Thank you. It's not something I ever guessed would happen. Amazing when I think back to the 16-year-old Jake 20 years ago. Like, I would never have guessed this. And to some degree, I'm guilty of just playing the game. It's like, I'd like an Australian passport. My kids are all Aussie. My wife's Aussie. I'd like to be able to come and go as freely as possible. But there was a questionnaire that you had to do. And the test was quite extraordinary, because the government propaganda was just off the charts, essentially. It was like, on the one hand, you can come to our country as long as you agree to abide by our laws. By the way, we believe firmly in the liberty of people. And then started talking about like what type of marriages people are allowed to have, i.e. you can have same sex, but you can't have multiple wives. And you're like, hang on a second. So you believe in freedom, but actually if we come, we have to agree to your laws. And also, even if I come from a country where I can have multiple wives, I'm now not allowed to do that here. Is that freedom? And the contradictions, right, which is so obvious to me, Now, I still took the test. I still signed the paperwork. I still did what they asked me to do. So I'm complicit in this to some degree. But it was an amazing experience to see. I mean, I don't even know at this stage, if I'm honest, like whether this was actually true, but somewhere like Australia that 2 centuries ago, was discovered by the Western world and has since built what it's built today through migration and what I would argue is pioneers, right? People who were willing to take huge risk and get halfway across the world on a boat and then start farming, start mining, start building.
That's right.
And what you have today is the result of that. And this is actually making my whole neck go up. It's like people came here and fought for it.
They did.
But what happened through COVID was a soft bunch of men rolled over on their sofas and did fuck all. That was actually pretty terrifying because we are more, or at least what it seemed to be the case. It might be at Sunday lunch tables, people are a lot more pissed off than you would know, right? They might not be talking about it online because of all the censorship that happened. I don't know, but it was pretty scary when, like, my wife, who's 5 foot something, was walking through the center of Melbourne to meet her mum, got like handcuffed by a bunch of police for being outside of her house at a certain time of night, and there's just police everywhere, right? No guns. That's why the Americans are so interesting about the gun laws. For the first time in my life,
it's interesting.
I was like, do you know what? I think actually the gun laws aren't so bad because there's a fairer scale in terms of like the bloat of the government. Whereas here, it's just like, govern me harder, baby. Let's go. And that was so obvious to me. And you're like, whoa, what happened? Did your granddad take risk? Fuck yeah, he took risk. Every single Aussie's grandparent took a lot of risk to get to this point. And they would be horrified if they saw what happened. So it's hard to then invest in a place, to your point, when you've witnessed that. So I do believe very strongly to resonate with your point, it was an extraordinary period of time to witness and changed my life for sure. But I then firmly believe in this idea of like, go where you're treated best. So I'm intrigued.
Yeah, I do too.
We've got another 5 minutes or so to hear about like where you might go and what you'd like to see in that place. And equally, I have to confess that even after all that experience, I still signed up as a citizen and I'm still building a life here. So perhaps I'm part of the problem.
Well, I think you're part of, a bunch of many people asking a lot of questions, Jake. So for me, Australia, whether we have gun laws or whether we don't, like for me, if we don't want somebody to have something, often it's a process of whether we trust the other person or whether we don't. But often deep down, we're potentially not sure whether we trust ourselves. And so for me, Australia has a crisis of personal responsibility and trust for the self. And I see the systemic issue in Australia is we want to outsource the responsibility to someone, to something, And for me, just to sum up the whole where Australia is you can lock us up, you can tell us what to eat, you can tell us where to go and when we can be out. We'll almost do anything unless, we'll do anything up until our property values go down. So for me, it's like when Australia sees property prices go down, then I think we'll see the litmus and the truth of really what's the underbelly here and whether we really have much of a backbone. Because for me, Australians will do anything provided their property prices go up. That's how I see it.
Wow. And hence how you might have become so jaded by that connection with property and understanding that even if you add value, it doesn't always increase the price. And that's what Bitcoin obviously shines a light on central banking. And shout out to Crispy back in Melbourne, who runs the Victoria Bitcoin Club. And they put out some great content recently, which shows A, how real estate is crashing against Bitcoin, but B, how real estate maps to Royal Bank of Australia moves. And it's it's very simple. Like real estate it's just mapping the currency denomination. It's not actually going up in value. And it's such a big moment for me when I'm like, hang on a second. Sorry, so they print money and asset prices move. And when you look at them
Yeah,
averaged out, the stock market's just mapping the money printing, and the real
exactly.
estate market's just mapping the money printing. So really what a house has become is a way to save your purchasing power against a money
Exactly.
printer. It's not
Exactly.
actually a good investment. You're
No.
just about getting by, purchasing power neutral. And then there's obviously the dynamics of a property market where it's like, well, no one actually wants to buy your house, mate. It's illiquid and there's not a buyer for it right now. Sorry. Or it got flooded, or it caught fire, or they put up a 5G tower around the corner, or they
Yeah.
didn't build the infrastructure project that everyone thought was going to be put in. You know, those are the nuances of a highly localized property market.
So many nuances.
But those nuances mean jack shit when someone can just go and print more money.
Exactly.
And so that's why you can live in a house for 2 years that degrades in actual features, but sells for more money. That doesn't make sense.
That's right. No, it doesn't.
Whoa.
It doesn't.
And so what do you think will happen if they were like, fuck it, we're going to have to actually create the real estate market? We're so bankrupt, it's got to happen. Is that even like, there'd be like complete carnage? What would happen?
Well, there's none of that will be on the cards. You know,
so they'll do anything they can to keep it going up.
They will do anything. That's the moral of the story. Here in Australia, the only thing that will change it if the control's taken out of their hands and something happens and they can't stop it, like that's it. But you know, the game is already set. So you know, for me, I'm wanting to take myself out. But look, I've been playing this game, Jake, and you know it's benefited from me, even though I critique it hardly. So it's like it's a complex thing. But I'm now saying, you know, it's time for me to make some changes, and I'm going to opt out of the current setup here in Australia, and I'm going to wait and see how things play out and explore, you know, other alternatives. So yeah.
And so, James, one last question we'll try and whip through, which is well, first of all, to resonate completely, like the idea of more accountability and more responsibility for individual action is absolutely what's needed in so many areas of life. And I am a huge advocate for that. So where possible, it's on you, mate. And you've got to figure it out, and you've got to deal with the costs and the benefits, by the way. The question is, if you follow that idea of go where your treat is best, like what are some of the areas of the world or areas of Australia perhaps that have caught your attention?
Well, for me, I'm going to explore overseas based on my curiosity and based on you know the fact that I have, I guess, the privilege to. So the cost of living day to day is something that I'm curious about. Creating a different balance to that. So look, I'm quite drawn to Central America at the moment and South America. I'm also have been, you know, in love with Europe for a long time. Europe offers some opportunity, also offers a kind of a similar wet towel to here in Australia. So, you know, I'm not sure whether there's options at the moment. Southeast Asia, I haven't explored much, but I know from a cost of living point of view, there's some real optionality there. But yeah, I would say I'm going to explore Central America imminently. I'm going to use that as a base to curiously just see what else sort of takes root. Yeah.
We'll have an amazing time, James. Thank you. If people wanted to reach out and have a chat, and it could easily be the case, like what would be the best way for people to get in touch?
I run a small Instagram account where I just showcase some of my design and furniture. That's the best place to connect. Other than that, an email. But yeah.
Okay, cool. We'll pop that in the show notes as well. Well, James, thank you so much for sharing all that today. Really, really great to learn from you. Thank you.
Thanks for having me, Jake.